The crisp December air nipped at my cheeks as I stepped out of our car, my eyes drawn to the imposing mansion before us. Its grand facade loomed against the darkening sky, windows glowing with warm light that seemed to mock the chills settling in my bones. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another Christmas Eve celebration, but a test I was destined to fail. "Come on, mi amor," Diego's voice cut through my reverie, his hand warm on the small of my back. "Mother's waiting." I forced a smile, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. It had been 4 years since I first met Alejandra, Diego's mother, but in all that time, not once had I felt genuine warmth in her gaze. Each encounter left me feeling like an intruder, an unwelcome addition to their tightly knit family circle. As we approached the ornate front door, I smoothed down my dress, the deep red number I'd agonized over choosing. Maybe this time, I thought, maybe this time I'd find a way to crack through Alejandra's icy exterior. The door swung open before we could knock, revealing Alejandra in all her intimidating glory. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant updo, her slim figure draped in a shimmering gold dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "Diego, mi hijo," she exclaimed, her face lighting up as she pulled him into an embrace. I watched as she peppered his face with kisses, her arms squeezing him like he was her lifeline to youth itself. The love between them was palpable, and for a moment, I felt a pang of envy. What would it be like, I wondered, to be welcomed so enthusiastically? Then her gaze fell on me, and the warmth in her eyes flickered out like a candle in the wind. "Hola, Amelia," she said, her tone clipped and impersonal. Her eyes darted towards the open door behind us, as if hoping I might take the hint and leave. "Feliz Navidad, Alejandra," I replied, mustering as much cheer as I could. "Thank you for having us." She nodded curtly, stepping aside to let us in. As I passed her, the scent of her expensive perfume washed over me, reminding me of how out of place I felt in this world of luxury and old money. The interior of the mansion was just as impressive as its exterior. A massive Christmas tree dominated the foyer, its branches heavy with ornaments that glinted in the soft light. Garlands of pine and holly adorned the banisters, filling the air with the scent of the holidays. It was beautiful, yes, but there was an artificial quality to it all, as if Christmas had been ordered from a high-end catalog rather than created with love and care. "Let me take your coats," Alejandra offered, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. As she helped Diego out of his jacket, her hands lingered on his shoulders, straightening imaginary wrinkles. When it was my turn, her movements were efficient and impersonal, as if she couldn't bear to touch me for longer than absolutely necessary. "Dinner will be ready soon," she announced, leading us towards the living room. "Diego, why don't you pour us some wine? The Cabernet you like is on the bar." I followed them, feeling more like a shadow than a part of the family. The living room was a study in understated opulence, with plush sofas arranged around a crackling fireplace. Family photos adorned the walls and side tables, chronicling Diego's life from infancy to adulthood. I scanned them, noting with a sinking heart that there wasn't a single picture of me among them. Diego busied himself at the bar, pouring generous glasses of deep red wine. Alejandra settled into an armchair, her posture perfect, legs crossed at the ankle. I perched on the edge of the sofa, feeling like a child called to the principal's office. "So, Amelia," Alejandra began, her tone deceptively light, "how is work? Still at that little nonprofit?" I nodded, accepting the glass of wine Diego offered me. "Yes, I am. We're actually in the middle of a big project right now, trying to secure funding for Oh, that's nice," Alejandra interrupted, her attention already shifting. "Diego, mi amor, tell me about that big case you're working on. The merger, wasn't it?" And just like that, I was shut out of the conversation. I sipped my wine, listening as Diego launched into an explanation of his latest legal triumph. Alejandra hung on his every word, her face alight with pride. Every now and then, she'd interject with a perfectly timed question or comment, proving she was well versed in the intricacies of corporate law. I tried to follow along, but the jargon soon left me feeling lost and excluded. My attempts to join the conversation were met with polite but dismissive nods from Alejandra, who would quickly steer the topic back to Diego's accomplishments. As the evening wore on, I found myself retreating further into silence. Diego, caught up in his mother's undivided attention, seemed to barely notice my discomfort. He kept refilling our glasses, the wine flowing as freely as their conversation. Finally, mercifully, Alejandra stood up. "I should check on dinner," she announced. "Diego, why don't you give your mother a hand?" I opened my mouth to offer my help, but Alejandra was already sweeping out of the room, Diego in tow. Left alone, I wandered over to the fireplace, studying the photos on the mantel. There was Diego as a chubby-cheeked toddler, as a grinning teenager holding a soccer trophy, as a proud graduate in his cap and gown. In every picture, Alejandra was by his side, her love and pride evident in her smile. I thought about my own family, so far away in Minnesota. We'd never had much money, but our Christmases had always been filled with laughter, terrible sweaters, and my dad's questionable eggnog. For a moment, I was overwhelmed by a wave of homesickness so strong it left me breathless. "Dinner is served," Alejandra's voice cut through my reverie. I turned to find her watching me, her expression unreadable. Had she seen the longing on my face? Did she care? The dining room was a vision of holiday splendor. The long table was set with fine china and crystal, a centerpiece of red and white flowers running its length. Candles flickered in ornate holders, casting a warm glow over the scene. It was beautiful, but intimidating, much like Alejandra herself. We took our seats, Diego at the head of the table with Alejandra and me on either side. The first course arrived, a delicate salad of winter greens and pomegranate seeds. As we began to eat, Alejandra dominated the conversation, her voice carrying over the soft clink of silverware against fine china. "Diego, darling, tell me more about that pro bono case you're working on. The one with the children's hospital." Diego's face lit up, and he launched into a detailed explanation of his latest charitable endeavor. I listened, pride swelling in my chest. This was the man I'd fallen in love with, compassionate, driven, always ready to help those in need. But as I watched Alejandra hanging on his every word, I couldn't help but wonder, why couldn't she see that same goodness in me? I tried to join the conversation, offering, "That's wonderful, Diego. It reminds me of a project we're working on at the nonprofit More Wine, Amelia." Alejandra interrupted smoothly, already reaching for the bottle. Before I could protest, she'd topped off my glass, effectively silencing me. The pattern continued through the main course, a beautifully prepared roast with all the trimmings. Every time I attempted to contribute to the discussion, Alejandra would find a way to redirect it back to Diego. It was like watching a masterclass in conversational manipulation, and I was the unwilling student. "Remember when you were little, Diego?" Alejandra said, her eyes twinkling with nostalgia. "You used to insist on helping in the kitchen every Christmas. You'd end up covered in flour, but oh, how determined you were." Diego laughed, the sound warm and rich. "I remember, Mama. I think I caused more chaos than help, though." "Nonsense," Alejandra waved her hand dismissively. "You were perfect. You still are." I pushed my food around my plate, suddenly not very hungry. My own childhood Christmases felt a world away, helping my mom frost cookies in our tiny kitchen, the radio blaring carols as we sang along off-key. It wasn't glamorous, but it was full of love. "What about you, Amelia?" Diego asked, catching my eye. "Any special Christmas traditions in your family?" Before I could answer, Alejandra chimed in. "Oh, I'm sure it was lovely, dear. But Diego, did I tell you about the call I got from Judge Ramirez?" He was very impressed with your performance in court last month. And just like that, I was sidelined again. I caught Diego's apologetic glance, but he did nothing to steer the conversation back to me. Instead, he dove into a discussion about legal strategy with his mother, leaving me to retreat into my own thoughts. As the dessert plates were cleared away, Alejandra stood up, smoothing down her dress. "I think it's time for a toast," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "Diego, would you do the honors?" Diego rose, lifting his glass. "To family," he began, his gaze moving between Alejandra and me. "To traditions old and new, and to the love that binds us together." "To family," Alejandra echoed, her eyes fixed solely on Diego. I raised my glass, murmuring the words along with them, but I felt like an outsider looking in on a private moment. The champagne Alejandra had poured for the toast tasted bitter on my tongue, a stark contrast to the sweet words being spoken. As we moved back to the living room for coffee, I excused myself to use the restroom. In the hallway, I paused in front of a large mirror, studying my reflection. My cheeks were flushed from the wine, and there was a tightness around my eyes that betrayed my discomfort. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. "You can do this," I whispered to my reflection. "It's just one night." When I returned to the living room, I found Diego and Alejandra huddled close on the sofa, looking at something on Diego's phone. Their heads were bent together, dark hair mingling, and the similarity between them struck me anew. They shared the same strong jaw, the same expressive eyebrows, the same rich brown eyes that had made me fall for Diego in the first place. "Amelia," Diego called, noticing me hovering in the doorway. "Come look at these photos from last year's firm Christmas party. Remember how much fun we had?" I moved closer, peering at the screen. There we were, Diego and I, dressed to the nines and smiling widely at the camera. I remembered that night, how nervous I'd been to meet his colleagues, how proud I'd felt to be on Diego's arm. "You looked beautiful, mi amor," Diego said softly, squeezing my hand. "She certainly cleans up well," Alejandra commented, her tone just shy of approving. "Though I've always thought you looked best in blue, Diego. It brings out your eyes." I bit back a sigh. Even a compliment from Alejandra came with a backhanded reminder of my inadequacy. As the night wore on, I found myself growing increasingly tired. The combination of rich food, flowing wine, and constant tension had left me drained. I stifled a yawn, hoping it wasn't too obvious. "Tired, dear?" Alejandra asked, her voice saccharine sweet. "I suppose it has been a long day for you. Diego, why don't you show Amelia to the guest room? I've had Maria make it up for you both." Diego nodded, standing up. "Come on, mi amor. Let's get you to bed." As we climbed the grand staircase, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and frustration. Relief that the evening was finally coming to an end, but frustration that once again, I'd failed to make any headway with Alejandra. The guest room was as luxurious as the rest of the house, with a king-sized bed draped in fine linens and a view of the snow-covered garden. Diego helped me out of my dress, his touch gentle. "I'm sorry about tonight," he murmured, pressing a kiss to my shoulder. "I know my mother can be difficult." I turned to face him, searching his eyes. "Diego, why does she hate me so much? What have I done wrong?" He sighed, pulling me into an embrace. "She doesn't hate you, Amelia. She's just protective. It's always been just the two of us, you know. It's hard for her to let someone else in." I wanted to argue, to point out all the ways Alejandra had snubbed and dismissed me throughout the evening. But I was too tired, too worn down by the constant battle for acceptance. "Maybe you're right," I conceded, not believing it for a second. "Maybe it just takes time." Diego smiled, relief evident in his eyes. "Exactly. Don't worry, mi amor. She'll come around eventually." Now get some sleep. Tomorrow's Christmas, after all. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Diego's steady breathing beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The way Alejandra had looked at me during that toast, the bitterness of the champagne, it all swirled in my mind, refusing to let me rest. Little did I know, that uneasy feeling was just the beginning. The events of the next day would shatter my world in ways I could never have imagined, leaving me to question everything I thought I knew about the man sleeping peacefully beside me. The next morning, I awoke to the soft glow of winter sunlight filtering through the heavy curtains of the guest room. For a moment, I lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and with them, a dull ache behind my eyes, a reminder of the wine I'd consumed in an attempt to dull the edge of Alejandra's hostility. Diego's side of the bed was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. I glanced at the ornate clock on the bedside table, 9:30 a.m. I'd slept later than I'd intended, no doubt a combination of emotional exhaustion and alcohol. As I sat up, a wave of nausea washed over me. It was more intense than any hangover I'd experienced before, accompanied by a strange metallic taste in my mouth. Fragments of the previous night flashed through my mind, the bitter champagne, the room spinning, Diego's panicked shout. Something wasn't right, but the details were frustratingly hazy. I pushed myself out of bed, fighting against the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm me. The plush carpet felt unsteady beneath my feet as I made my way to the ensuite bathroom. The face that greeted me in the mirror was pale and drawn, with dark circles under my eyes that no amount of sleep seemed to have erased. As I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the lingering grogginess, I heard muffled voices from downstairs. Diego and Alejandra, their tones hushed but intense. I couldn't make out the words, but the urgency in their voices sent a shiver down my spine. I dressed quickly in a comfortable sweater and jeans, foregoing makeup in my haste to join them. As I descended the grand staircase, the voices grew clearer, emanating from what I remembered to be Alejandra's study. "Can't keep this up forever, Diego," Alejandra was saying, her voice tight with frustration. "She's not as naive as you think." "I know, Mama," Diego replied, sounding weary. "But what choice do we have? We've come too far to turn back now." I froze on the last step, my heart pounding. What were they talking about? What had they come too far with? Before I could decide whether to announce my presence or try to listen further, the study door swung open. Diego emerged, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He stopped short when he saw me, surprise flashing across his face before it was replaced by a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Amelia, mi amor. You're up. How are you feeling?" I forced a smile, trying to ignore the knot of unease in my stomach. "I'm okay. A bit of a headache, but nothing serious. Is everything all right? I thought I heard you and Alejandra talking." Diego's smile faltered for a split second before he recovered, moving to wrap an arm around my shoulders. "Everything's fine, Carino. Just some last-minute Christmas planning. You know how Mama gets about the details." From behind him, Alejandra appeared in the doorway of the study. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, her makeup flawless, as if she'd been awake for hours. Her eyes narrowed slightly as they fell on me, but her voice was honeyed when she spoke. "Amelia, dear. I hope you slept well. You gave us quite a scare last night." I blinked, confused. "Last night? What do you mean?" Diego and Alejandra exchanged a quick glance that I couldn't quite decipher. It was Diego who answered, his tone carefully neutral. "You don't remember? You fainted during the toast. One minute you were standing, the next you just collapsed." The memory hit me like a physical blow, the room spinning, the crash of my wine glass, the darkness closing in. But there was something else, something important that I couldn't quite grasp. I fainted. But why? I've never fainted before in my life. Alejandra waved a dismissive hand. Oh, it was probably just the excitement of the evening. Too much rich food, too much wine. These things happen, dear. The important thing is that you're all right now. Her words were solicitous, but there was an undercurrent of something. Impatience? Annoyance? I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it made me uneasy. Come, Diego said, steering me towards the dining room. Let's get some breakfast in you. You'll feel better with some food in your stomach. The dining room looked different in the harsh light of day. The previous night's festive decorations seemed garish now, the twinkling lights and glittering ornaments at odds with the cold winter sunlight streaming through the windows. A modest breakfast spread was laid out on the table, fruits, pastries, coffee. As we sat down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Diego and Alejandra were being almost too solicitous, passing me dishes, urging me to eat, exchanging meaningful glances when they thought I wasn't looking. I picked at a croissant, my appetite diminished by the lingering nausea and growing sense of unease. So, I said, trying to keep my voice light, what exactly happened after I fainted? It's all a bit of a blur. Diego reached out to pat my hand, his touch comforting but somehow perfunctory. It was pretty scary, mi amor. 1 minute you were fine, the next you just crumpled. I managed to catch you before you hit the floor, thank God. We were so worried, Alejandra chimed in, her voice dripping with concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. Diego carried you to the lounge. We debated calling an ambulance, but you came around pretty quickly. I frowned, trying to reconcile their account with my fragmented memories. I remember waking up on the couch, I said slowly. Diego was standing over me, wiping his hands on a towel. And there was a bottle, a champagne bottle on the floor. For a split second, I saw panic flicker across Diego's face. But it was gone so quickly I wondered if I'd imagined it. That's right, he said smoothly. I knocked over the champagne when I was trying to help you. Made quite a mess, actually. You should have seen him, Alejandra added with a laugh that sounded forced to my ears. My strong, capable son, all thumbs in a crisis. But he took good care of you, Amelia. You're lucky to have him. I nodded absently, my mind racing. Something about their explanation didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Maybe it was the way they kept glancing at each other, or the slight tremor in Diego's hand as he lifted his coffee cup to his lips. I'm sorry if I ruined the evening, I said, more to fill the uncomfortable silence than anything else. Nonsense, Alejandra replied, her tone brusque. These things happen. The important thing is that you're feeling better now. Aren't you, dear? There was an edge to her question that made me pause. It felt less like concern and more like a prompt. As if she were reminding me of a script I was supposed to follow. Yes, I said slowly, watching their reactions carefully. I'm feeling much better. Thank you both for taking care of me. Relief washed over their faces, so palpable it was almost comical. Diego squeezed my hand, his smile warm but his eyes guarded. Of course, mi amor. That's what family is for, right? Family. The word hung in the air between us, loaded with unspoken tensions and expectations. I thought about my own family, so far away in Minnesota. What would they think of all this? My mom would be fussing over me, insisting on taking me to the doctor. My dad would be cracking jokes to lighten the mood, but I'd see the worry in his eyes. Here, in this cold, beautiful house, with its secrets and stilted conversations, I felt more alone than ever. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of forced cheer and stilted conversation. Diego and Alejandra seemed determined to act as if nothing unusual had happened, chattering about Christmas plans and family gossip. I played along, smiling and nodding in all the right places, but inside, my mind was whirling. As we moved to the living room to open presents, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. The way Diego and Alejandra kept exchanging glances, the slight tremor in Diego's hands as he handed me a beautifully wrapped gift, the too bright smile on Alejandra's face as she urged me to open it, it all felt like a carefully choreographed performance. "Oh, it's beautiful," I exclaimed, holding up the delicate silver necklace Diego had given me. And it was beautiful, an intricate pendant in the shape of a snowflake, studded with tiny diamonds that caught the light. But as Diego fastened it around my neck, his fingers brushing against my skin, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather outside. "I'm so glad you like it, mi amor," Diego murmured, pressing a kiss to my cheek. But his eyes were distant, as if he were already thinking about something else. Alejandra's gift was a cashmere sweater in a soft shade of blue. "I noticed you didn't have many winter clothes," she said, her tone somewhere between solicitous and condescending. "This should keep you warm." "Thank you, Alejandra," I said, running my fingers over the soft fabric. "It's lovely." She nodded, satisfied, but I couldn't help noticing that she'd barely glanced at the hand-knitted scarf I'd given her, now lying forgotten on the side table. As the day wore on, I found myself growing increasingly restless. The house felt stifling, the air heavy with unspoken tensions and half-truths. I needed to clear my head, to get away from the constant scrutiny of Diego and Alejandra's watchful eyes. "I think I'm going to take a walk," I announced, standing up abruptly. "Get some fresh air." Diego frowned, concern creasing his brow. "Are you sure that's a good idea, Amelia? You're still recovering from last night. Maybe you should rest." "I'm fine," I insisted, perhaps a bit more forcefully than necessary. "The fresh air will do me good. I won't go far, I promise." Alejandra's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice was honey-sweet when she spoke. "Of course, dear. Just be careful. The paths can be treacherous this time of year." As I bundled up in my coat and boots, I could feel their eyes on me, heavy with unspoken warnings. But I didn't care. I needed to escape, if only for a little while. The cold hit me like a physical blow as I stepped outside, the crisp winter air burning my lungs. But it felt good, invigorating after the stuffy atmosphere of the house. I set off down the winding driveway, snow crunching beneath my feet. As I walked, my mind raced, replaying the events of the past 24 hours. The dinner, the toast, the fainting spell, it all felt wrong somehow, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. And then there were the whispered conversations, the meaningful glances, the way Diego and Alejandra seemed to be constantly on edge. What were they hiding? And why did I have the sinking feeling that it had something to do with me? I was so lost in thought that I almost missed it, a flash of color against the stark white snow. I stopped, squinting against the glare of the winter sun. There, half buried in a snowbank, was a crumpled piece of paper. Curious, I fished it out, brushing off the clinging snow. It was a fragment of what looked like a medical report, the letterhead torn away. Most of the text was too water-damaged to read, but a few words stood out in stark black ink, symptoms consistent with gradual administration of long-term effects unknown. My blood ran cold as I stared at the scrap of paper. What was this? And how had it ended up here, in the driveway of Alejandra's secluded mansion? Before I could ponder it further, I heard the crunch of footsteps behind me. I whirled around, instinctively crumpling the paper in my fist. Diego was striding towards me, his face a mask of concern. "Amelia." I was worried. "You've been gone for almost an hour." Had it really been that long? I forced a smile, trying to ignore the way my heart was pounding. "Sorry, I guess I lost track of time." The fresh air felt good. Diego's eyes flickered to my clenched fist, a flash of something, fear, crossing his face. What's that you've got there? I hesitated for a split second before opening my hand, letting the scrap of paper flutter to the ground. Oh, just some trash I found. I was going to throw it away when I got back to the house. Diego's shoulders relaxed slightly, but there was still a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there before. Well, why don't we head back now? Mama made hot chocolate, and I'm sure you could use something warm after your walk. As we trudged back to the house, Diego's arm around my shoulders, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see. The words from that scrap of paper echoed in my mind, mixing with fragments of overheard conversations and half-remembered moments from the night before. What exactly had happened during that toast? And why couldn't I shake the feeling that the answer was something far more sinister than a simple fainting spell? Back in the warmth of the house, Alejandra greeted us with steaming mugs of hot chocolate. But as I sipped the rich, sweet liquid, I couldn't help but wonder, what else might be hiding beneath its innocuous surface? The rest of the day passed in a blur of forced cheer and carefully measured conversations. We went through the motions of a family Christmas, opening more presents, watching classic holiday movies, indulging in rich foods and sweet treats. But beneath it all, there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't ignore. Every time I caught Diego's eye, I saw a flicker of something. Guilt? Fear? And Alejandra, for all her solicitous smiles and honeyed words, watched me like a hawk, her dark eyes missing nothing. As night fell and we prepared for bed, I found myself dreading the thought of another night in this house. The guest room, with its luxurious furnishings and soft lighting, suddenly felt like a gilded cage. "Are you sure you're feeling all right, mi amor?" Diego asked as we got ready for bed. "You've been quiet all evening." I forced a smile, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in my stomach. "I'm fine, just tired. It's been a long day." Diego nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. As he leaned in to kiss me goodnight, I caught a whiff of something on his breath, not the minty freshness of toothpaste, but something sharper, more medicinal. That night, I lay awake long after Diego's breathing had evened out into sleep. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of conversations, odd glances, that scrap of paper in the snow. What was really going on in this house? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? As the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, I made a decision. I needed answers, and I was going to get them, no matter what it took. The next morning, I woke with a sense of determination that cut through the lingering fog of sleep. The events of the past 2 days swirled in my mind, a jumble of suspicious glances, hushed conversations, and that damning scrap of paper in the snow. I knew I needed answers, but I also knew that getting them wouldn't be easy. As I dressed, I could hear Diego and Alejandra's voices drifting up from downstairs, their tones hushed but intense. I paused at the top of the stairs, straining to make out their words. "Can't keep this up forever, Diego," Alejandra was saying, her voice tight with frustration. "She's not stupid. She's going to figure it out eventually." "I know, Mama," Diego replied, sounding weary. "But what choice do we have? We've come too far to turn back now." My heart pounded in my chest. What were they talking about? What had they come too far with? Before I could hear more, their voices dropped even lower, becoming indistinguishable murmurs. Taking a deep breath, I descended the stairs, making sure my footsteps were audible. By the time I reached the kitchen, Diego and Alejandra were seated at the breakfast table, looking for all the world like the picture of domestic tranquility. "Good morning, mi amor," Diego said, rising to greet me with a kiss. "How did you sleep?" I forced a smile, trying to ignore the way my skin crawled at his touch. "Fine, thanks. And you?" "Like a log," he replied with a chuckle that sounded just a little too forced. Mama's making pancakes. Want some? I nodded, taking a seat at the table. Alejandra bustled around the kitchen, her movements efficient and graceful. As she set a plate of golden pancakes in front of me, her eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of something. Concern? Guilt? It was gone so quickly I couldn't be sure. Eat up, dear, she said, her voice warm but with an undercurrent of steel. You need to keep your strength up. As we ate, I tried to steer the conversation towards the events of Christmas Eve. You know, I said, keeping my tone light, I still can't believe I fainted during the toast. That's never happened to me before. Diego and Alejandra exchanged a quick glance that I might have missed if I hadn't been watching for it. These things happen, Amelia, Alejandra said smoothly. Especially with all the excitement of the holidays. You probably just got overwhelmed. Maybe, I conceded, not willing to push too hard just yet. But it's strange, isn't it? I mean, I've never been prone to fainting. And the champagne tasted odd. Diego reached out to pat my hand, his touch just a little too firm to be comforting. Mi amor, you're overthinking this. It was just a little too much wine, that's all. No need to dwell on it. I wanted to argue, to point out all the inconsistencies in their story, but I could see the warning in Diego's eyes. Now wasn't the time. Instead, I nodded, focusing on my pancakes. As the day wore on, I found myself constantly on edge, watching Diego and Alejandra for any slip, any hint of what they were hiding. But they were careful, almost too careful. Every time I tried to bring up the events of Christmas Eve, they'd smoothly change the subject or offer platitudes that explained everything away. Remember how you said you found me on the couch? I asked Diego as we were clearing away the lunch dishes. What exactly happened after I fainted? Diego's hands stilled for a moment, the plate he was drying suspended in midair. I told you, mi amor. You collapsed during the toast. I carried you to the couch, and you came around pretty quickly. But I remember seeing a champagne bottle on the floor, I pressed. And you were wiping your hands on a towel. For a split second, I saw panic flicker in Diego's eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by a look of fond exasperation. Amelia, Carino, you were barely conscious. Your memory of that moment isn't reliable. I knocked over a glass when I was trying to help you, that's all. You're making a mystery out of nothing. His words were reasonable, his tone gentle, but something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. It was as if he was trying to rewrite my memories, to make me doubt what I knew to be true. Later that afternoon, I managed to get a moment alone with Alejandra in the kitchen. She was preparing dinner, her movements precise and controlled as she chopped vegetables. Alejandra, I began, trying to keep my voice steady, I wanted to thank you again for taking care of me on Christmas Eve. It must have been scary, seeing me faint like that. She didn't look up from her chopping, but I saw her shoulders tense slightly. It was nothing, dear. As I said, these things happen. Still, I pressed, I can't help but wonder why it happened. I've never fainted before in my life. And the champagne tasted strange. Alejandra's knife stilled on the cutting board. When she turned to face me, her expression was a mask of concern, but her eyes were hard. Amelia, dear, I think you're letting your imagination run away with you. The champagne was perfectly fine. Everyone else drank it without any issues. Perhaps you were just more affected by the alcohol than usual. It happens sometimes, especially when we're stressed or tired. Her words were reasonable, her tone solicitous, but there was an edge to her voice that made me uneasy. It was as if she was daring me to contradict her, to voice the suspicions that were growing stronger. By the hour. Maybe you're right, I said, forcing a smile. I guess I'm just not used to such fancy champagne. Alejandra's answering smile didn't reach her eyes. That must be it. Now, why don't you go relax in the living room? Dinner will be ready soon. As I left the kitchen, I could feel her eyes boring into my back. The message was clear: drop it. But I couldn't drop it. The more they tried to explain away my concerns, the more convinced I became that something was terribly wrong. That night, as Diego slept beside me, I lay awake, my mind racing. I replayed every conversation, every glance, every odd moment since we'd arrived at Alejandra's house. There was a pattern there, I was sure of it. But what did it mean? Unable to sleep, I slipped out of bed and made my way downstairs. The house was silent, moonlight casting long shadows across the polished floors. I found myself drawn to Alejandra's study, the room where I'd overheard that hushed conversation on Christmas morning. The door was locked, of course. But as I jiggled the handle in frustration, I noticed something odd. There, on the floor just visible under the door, was a small scrap of paper. My heart pounding, I knelt down and carefully worked the paper out from under the door. It was a torn corner of what looked like a medical document, similar to the one I'd found in the snow. But this time, the words were clearer: gradual administration of, illegible, may result in memory loss, disorientation, and in some cases, blackouts. Long-term effects unknown. Caution advised. My blood ran cold as I read the words. Memory loss. Disorientation. Blackouts. It was as if someone had written a description of exactly what had happened to me on Christmas Eve. But before I could process what I was reading, I heard a floorboard creak behind me. I whirled around, instinctively crumpling the paper in my fist. Diego stood at the end of the hallway, his face half in shadow. Amelia? What are you doing down here? I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. I couldn't sleep. I was just getting some water. Diego took a step closer, his eyes flickering to my clenched fist. What's that you've got there? For a moment, I considered showing him the paper, demanding answers. But something in his expression made me hesitate. Instead, I forced a laugh, opening my hand to reveal nothing but my empty palm. What, this? I don't have anything. You must be seeing things in the dark. Diego's shoulders relaxed slightly, but there was a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there before. Come on, mi amor. Let's go back to bed. You need your rest. As he led me back upstairs, his hand on the small of my back, I could feel the scrap of paper burning against my skin where I'd hastily tucked it into the waistband of my pajamas. I knew now, without a doubt, that something sinister was going on in this house. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The next morning, I woke early, my mind already racing with plans. I needed to find out more, to gather evidence of whatever it was Diego and Alejandra were hiding. But I also needed to be careful. If they suspected I was onto them, who knew what they might do? As I dressed, I could hear Diego in the shower, humming tunelessly. I took the opportunity to hide the scrap of paper I'd found the night before, tucking it securely into the lining of my suitcase. Then, taking a deep breath, I headed downstairs to face another day of smiles and lies. Alejandra was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. As I entered, she looked up, her face a mask of motherly concern. Amelia, dear, you look tired. Didn't you sleep well? I forced a smile, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. I'm fine, just a bit restless. New place, you know how it is. She nodded sympathetically, but I didn't miss the way her eyes narrowed slightly, assessing. Of course. Well, a good breakfast will perk you right up. I'm making Diego's favorite, huevos rancheros. As we ate, I tried to keep the conversation light, asking about family traditions and holiday memories. But all the while, my mind was working overtime, looking for any opportunity to gather more information. You know, I said casually as Diego was regaling us with a story from his college days. I was thinking of taking another walk today. The grounds here are so beautiful, I'd love to explore them more. Diego and Alejandra exchanged a quick glance that I pretended not to notice. Are you sure that's a good idea, mi amor? Diego asked, his tone carefully neutral. You're still recovering from your episode. Maybe you should rest today. I shook my head, keeping my expression innocent. I feel fine, really. The fresh air will do me good. Besides, I thought I might take some photos to show my parents. They'd love to see where we spent Christmas. Alejandra's smile was tight as she stood to clear the plates. What a lovely idea. Just be careful, dear. Some of the paths can be treacherous this time of year. As soon as breakfast was over, I bundled up and headed outside, my phone tucked securely in my pocket. The winter air was brisk, the snow crunching under my boots as I made my way down the winding driveway. Once I was out of sight of the house, I began my search in earnest. I retraced my steps from the other day, looking for any sign of more discarded papers. But the snow was pristine, unmarked save for my own footprints. Just as I was about to give up and head back, something caught my eye. There, half hidden beneath a bush, was a glint of metal. Heart pounding, I knelt down to investigate. It was a small vial, the kind used for prescription medications. The label had been torn off, but there was still a faint residue inside. Without thinking, I pocketed it, my mind racing with possibilities. Back at the house, I found Diego and Alejandra in the living room, their heads bent close together in conversation. They looked up as I entered, their smiles just a little too bright. Did you have a nice walk, dear? Alejandra asked, her voice honeyed. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. It was lovely. The snow makes everything look so magical. Diego stood, crossing the room to wrap an arm around my shoulders. I'm glad you enjoyed it, mi amor. But you must be cold now. Why don't I make you some hot chocolate? As he led me to the kitchen, I could feel Alejandra's eyes on my back, watchful and wary. I knew then that my every move was being scrutinized, my every word analyzed for hidden meanings. The rest of the day passed in a haze of forced smiles and careful conversations. I played the part of the dutiful wife and grateful guest, all the while looking for any opportunity to gather more evidence. But Diego and Alejandra were always there, always watching. If I lingered too long near Alejandra's study, Diego would appear as if by magic, suggesting we watch a movie or go for a drive. If I tried to bring up the events of Christmas Eve, Alejandra would smoothly change the subject, her eyes warning me not to push. By the time night fell, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. As Diego and I prepared for bed, I could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Amelia, Diego said as we lay in the darkness, his voice soft but serious. Is everything okay? You've seemed distracted today. I turned to face him, studying the familiar lines of his face in the dim light. This was the man I'd fallen in love with, the man I'd promised to spend my life with. How had we ended up here, in this web of secrets and lies? I'm fine, I lied, forcing a smile. Just tired, I guess. It's been a long few days. Diego nodded, pulling me close. I know. But we'll be home soon, back to our normal life. Everything will be better then, you'll see. As I lay in his arms, listening to his breathing even out into sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that our normal life was gone forever. Whatever was going on in this house, whatever secrets Diego and Alejandra were keeping, I knew that uncovering the truth would change everything. But I also knew that I couldn't stop now. I'd come too far, seen too much. Tomorrow, I vowed silently, tomorrow I would find the answers I needed, no matter what it took. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my mind already racing with plans. The house was silent, the pre-dawn darkness pressing against the windows like a living thing. Beside me, Diego slept on, his face peaceful in repose. Looking at him, I felt a pang of longing for the simple, uncomplicated love we'd once shared. But those days were gone, shattered by secrets and lies. Careful not to wake him, I slipped out of bed and dressed quickly. I had a mission today, and I couldn't afford any distractions or interruptions. As I crept down the hallway, my sock-clad feet silent on the plush carpet, I paused outside Alejandra's room. No sound came from within. Good. With any luck, I'd have at least an hour before either of them stirred. I made my way to Alejandra's study, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would wake the entire house. The door was still locked, of course, but I came prepared this time. From my pocket, I pulled out a small lock-picking set I'd ordered months ago on a whim, never imagining I'd actually use it. My hands shook as I inserted the tools into the lock, remembering the YouTube tutorials I'd watched in secret. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a soft click. My breath caught in my throat as I turned the handle, and the door swung open silently. The study was bathed in the soft glow of a desk lamp, left on perhaps by accident, or maybe as a deterrent to intruders like me. I slipped inside, closing the door behind me. The room was immaculate, every surface polished to a high shine. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes and framed photographs. But I wasn't here for a trip down memory lane. I made my way to Alejandra's desk, a massive mahogany piece that dominated the room. Gingerly, I began opening drawers, rifling through papers as quietly as I could. Most of it seemed innocuous enough: bills, correspondence, old Christmas cards. But then, in the bottom drawer, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a file folder, unmarked except for a small red dot in the corner. With trembling hands, I opened it, and felt the world tilt beneath my feet. Inside were medical reports, dozens of them, all bearing my name. Blood tests, brain scans, detailed notes in a handwriting I didn't recognize. And there, paper-clipped to the front, was a document that looked eerily familiar, the full version of the scrap I'd found in the snow. I began to read, my horror growing with each word. Subject: Amelia Reyes treatment, gradual administration of compound X17 dosage, increasing from 0.5 mg to 2 mg over 6-month period. Observed effects: memory lapses, periods of disorientation, occasional blackouts. Notes: subject shows no signs of suspicion. Recommend continuing treatment with caution. My mind reeled as I tried to process what I was seeing. They had been drugging me. 4 months. But why? What could possibly justify this kind of betrayal? Before I could read further, I heard a floorboard creak in the hallway outside. Panic surged through me as I hastily shoved the file back into the drawer, my eyes darting around for a place to hide. But it was too late. The door opened, and there stood Alejandra, her silver hair gleaming in the soft light, her eyes hard as flint. Well, she said, her voice deceptively calm. What do we have here? For a moment, I considered lying, making up some excuse for why I was in her private study at the crack of dawn. But as I met her gaze, I knew it was pointless. The game was up. Why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why are you doing this to me? Alejandra's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. Oh, Amelia. If only you knew. If only you could understand the necessity of what we've done. Before I could respond, I heard footsteps behind her. Diego appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. Amelia? Mama? What's going on? I looked from Diego to Alejandra, searching their faces for any sign of the people I thought I knew. But all I saw were strangers, their familiar features suddenly alien and threatening. They've been drugging me, Diego, I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by anger and betrayal. 4 months. There are medical reports, tests. Why? What have you done to me? Diego's face paled, his eyes darting to Alejandra. Mama, what is she talking about? But Alejandra's composure never wavered. Now, she said, her tone soothing, as if speaking to a frightened child. I think we all need to calm down and discuss this rationally. Amelia, dear, you're clearly upset and confused. Why don't we go to the living room and talk about this over a nice cup of tea? I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter in the quiet room. Tea? You want to drug me again, you mean? No. No more lies, no more games. I want the truth, and I want it now. Diego took a step towards me, his hands held out in a placating gesture. Mi amor, please. You don't understand. We were trying to protect you. Protect me. I spat the words, backing away from him. By poisoning me. By messing with my mind. What kind of protection is that? Alejandra sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. Amelia, you're being dramatic. No one has poisoned you. The medication was for your own good. You've been unwell for some time now. We were simply trying to help you. I shook my head, fighting against the doubt that tried to creep in. This was what they wanted, I realized. To make me question my own mind, my own memories. No, I said firmly. No, I don't believe you. I've seen the reports. I know what you've been doing. And I want to know why. For a moment, silence reigned in the study. I could see the wheels turning in Alejandra's mind, calculating her next move. Diego just looked lost, his gaze bouncing between his mother and me as if hoping one of us would tell him what to do. Finally, Alejandra spoke, her voice low and intense. Very well. If you insist on knowing, then know this, everything we've done has been to protect this family. To protect Diego. You see, Amelia, you've stumbled upon something you were never meant to know. Something that could destroy everything we've built. My mind raced, trying to make sense of her words. What are you talking about? What could I possibly know that would justify this? Diego stepped forward then, his face a mask of anguish. It's about my past, Amelia. About what I did before we met. I turned to him, my heart pounding. What do you mean, what you did? He opened his mouth to speak, but Alejandra cut him off with a sharp gesture. Enough, Diego. She doesn't need to know the details. Suffice it to say, Amelia, that there are aspects of Diego's past that are best left buried. For everyone's sake. I looked between them, my mind whirling. What could Diego have done that was so terrible it justified drugging me into compliance? And how had I never suspected, never seen any hint of this dark secret? I don't understand, I said, my voice shaking. Why didn't you just tell me? Why go to all this trouble to keep me in the dark? Alejandra's laugh was cold and mirthless. Tell you? Oh, my dear, naive girl. Do you really think you could have handled the truth? Do you think you would have stayed, knowing what you know now? I wanted to argue, to insist that my love for Diego could have withstood any revelation. But the words died in my throat as I realized the magnitude of what they'd done. They hadn't trusted me. They'd decided, without giving me a choice, that I couldn't be allowed to know the truth. So what now? I asked, suddenly feeling very tired. Are you going to keep drugging me? Keep me a puppet on your strings? Diego made a sound of distress, reaching out to me. No, mi amor. No more drugs, I promise. We'll find another way. But Alejandra's eyes had hardened, her mouth set in a grim line. I'm afraid it's not that simple, Diego. She knows too much now. We can't risk her talking to anyone, exposing our secrets. A chill ran down my spine at her words. "What are you saying?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Alejandra moved then, quick as a striking snake. Before I could react, she'd pulled a small syringe from her pocket, its contents gleaming wickedly in the soft light. "I'm saying, my dear, that it's time for you to take a little nap. When you wake up, well, let's just say things will be much clearer." I backed away, my eyes darting wildly around the room for an escape route. But Alejandra was between me and the door, and Diego. Diego just stood there, his face a mask of anguish and indecision. "Diego, please," I begged, my voice breaking. "Don't let her do this. If you ever loved me, if any part of what we had was real, please help me." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the man I loved in his eyes. But then Alejandra spoke, her voice hard as steel. "Diego, remember what's at stake here. Remember what we've sacrificed to keep you safe. Are you going to throw it all away now?" I saw the moment Diego's resolve crumbled. His shoulders slumped, his eyes dropping to the floor. "I'm sorry, Amelia," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Alejandra moved towards me, the syringe raised. I backed away, my heart pounding, knowing I was trapped but unable to give up without a fight. "Stay away from me," I warned, grabbing a heavy bookend from the desk. "I swear, I'll scream. I'll hurt you if I have to." Alejandra's laugh was cold and mocking. "Oh, Amelia. Always so dramatic. Don't you see? No one will hear you. No one will come to your rescue. It's just us here, just family." The way she said, "family," sent chills down my spine. This wasn't family. This was a nightmare, a perversion of everything I'd ever believed about love and trust. As Alejandra advanced, I made a desperate lunge for the door. But Diego was there, his strong arms wrapping around me, holding me in place. I fought against him, screaming, kicking, but it was no use. He was too strong, and I was weakened by days of stress and fear. "Show mi amor," Diego murmured in my ear, his voice choked with tears. "Don't fight. It will only hurt more if you fight." I felt the sharp sting of the needle in my arm, and almost immediately, the room began to spin. My limbs felt heavy, my thoughts sluggish. As darkness crept in at the edges of my vision, I saw Alejandra's face swimming before me, her expression a mixture of triumph and what might have been regret. "Sleep now, Amelia," she said softly. "When you wake up, all of this will seem like a bad dream. And we'll be a happy family again. Just like we were always meant to be." The last thing I saw before consciousness slipped away was Diego's face, tears streaming down his cheeks as he held me. And then, mercifully, there was only darkness. I don't know how long I was out. Time seemed to stretch and warp, fragments of dreams and memories blending together in a kaleidoscope of confusion. I saw flashes of my life with Diego, our first date, our wedding day, quiet evenings at home, but they were tainted now, overshadowed by the knowledge of his betrayal. When I finally clawed my way back to consciousness, the first thing I became aware of was the pounding in my head. It felt like a marching band had taken up residence behind my eyes, each drumbeat sending shockwaves of pain through my skull. Slowly, cautiously, I opened my eyes. I was back in the guest room, tucked into the massive bed with its 2 soft pillows and silky sheets. For a moment, I wondered if it had all been a nightmare, the discovery in Alejandra's study, the confrontation, the drugging. But the ache in my arm where the needle had gone in told me it had all been horribly, terrifyingly real. I tried to sit up, but my limbs felt like lead weights. Whatever Alejandra had given me, it was strong stuff. As I struggled to orient myself, I became aware of voices drifting in from the hallway. Diego and Alejandra, their tones hushed but intense. "Can't keep doing this, Mama," Diego was saying, his voice tight with stress. It's not right. She doesn't deserve this. And what would you suggest? Alejandra's voice was cold, practical. Let her go. Let her tell the world what she knows. Everything we've worked for, everything we've sacrificed, you'd throw it all away for her. There was a long pause, and when Diego spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Maybe it's time to face the consequences. To tell the truth. Alejandra's laugh was harsh, mirthless. Oh, Diego. My sweet, naive boy. Do you really think the world would understand? Do you think they'd forgive you, just because you decided to come clean? No. We made our choice years ago. There's no going back now. I lay there, my mind reeling, trying to process what I was hearing. What could Diego have done that was so terrible, so unforgivable, that they'd go to these lengths to keep it hidden? And more importantly, what were they planning to do with me now? Before I could hear more, the voices moved away, fading into indistinct murmurs. I was alone again, trapped in a body that wouldn't obey me in a mind clouded by drugs and fear. I'm not sure how long I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness. Time seemed to lose all meaning, minutes stretching into hours, or maybe it was the other way around. Every now and then, I'd hear footsteps in the hallway, muffled voices, but no one entered the room. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I managed to push myself into a sitting position. The room spun alarmingly, and for a moment I thought I might be sick. But I gritted my teeth, forcing down the nausea. I needed to think, to plan. I needed to find a way out of this nightmare. As my head cleared, I took stock of my situation. I was still in my clothes from earlier, which was something at least. My phone was gone, no surprise there, but they hadn't changed me or restrained me. Either they were very confident in the effectiveness of whatever drug they'd given me, or they were being careless. I hoped it was the latter. Slowly, painfully, I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floor seemed to tilt and sway beneath my feet, but I managed to stand, gripping the bedpost for support. Step by shaky step, I made my way to the door. I wasn't really surprised to find it locked, but my heart sank nonetheless. I was trapped, a prisoner in this beautiful, terrible house. But I refused to give up. Somehow, some way, I was going to get out of here. I was going to expose Diego and Alejandra's lies, their manipulation, their crimes, whatever they might be. And then, I was going to make them pay. I don't know how long I stood there, leaning against the locked door, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. The house was quiet, almost unnaturally so, as if it was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I knew I couldn't stay here, trapped and at their mercy. I had to find a way out, to expose the truth, to reclaim my life. With trembling hands, I began to search the room, looking for anything I could use as a weapon or a tool. The ornate lamps were too heavy and unwieldy. The curtain rods were firmly attached to the wall. Even the expensive-looking letter opener on the writing desk was too dull to be of much use. Just as I was about to give up hope, my eyes fell on the delicate silver necklace Diego had given me for Christmas. The snowflake pendant glinted in the soft light, and suddenly, I had an idea. With shaking fingers, I unclasped the necklace and began to work on the lock. It was slow, painstaking work. My hands were still unsteady from the drugs, and I had to stop frequently to listen for footsteps in the hallway. But finally, after what felt like hours, I heard a soft click. The door swung open, and I was free. The hallway was dark and silent. I crept along, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet, every nerve on high alert. As I passed Alejandra's room, I heard soft snoring from within. At least one of my captors was asleep. But where was Diego? I made my way downstairs, wincing at every creaking floorboard. The grand foyer, so impressive when we first arrived, now felt oppressive and threatening. The Christmas tree loomed in the corner, its cheerful lights mocking the nightmare I found myself in. Just as I reached for the front door, a voice froze me in my tracks. "Going somewhere, mi amor?" I whirled around to find Diego standing at the foot of the stairs, his face a mask of sorrow and resignation. He looked tired, older somehow, as if the weight of his secrets had aged him overnight. "Diego," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Please. Let me go." He took a step towards me, his hands held out in a placating gesture. "Amelia, please. You don't understand. If you'd just let us explain. Explain." I cut him off, anger giving strength to my voice. "Explain how you've been drugging me for months. How you and your mother have been playing with my mind, my memories. What could possibly justify that?" Diego flinched as if I'd struck him. "It's complicated, mi amor. There are things about my past, about our family, that you don't know. That you can't know. It's for your own protection." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that seemed to echo in the cavernous foyer. "My protection? Is that what you call this? Keeping me prisoner, poisoning me?" "We never meant to hurt you," Diego pleaded, taking another step closer. "We love you, Amelia. Everything we've done has been out of love." I backed away, my hand fumbling for the door handle behind me. "If this is love, Diego, then I want no part of it. Real love doesn't manipulate. It doesn't lie. It doesn't drug someone into compliance." For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd fallen in love with in Diego's eyes. Regret, shame, and something that might have been resolved crossed his face. "You're right," he said softly. "This isn't love. This is madness. And it needs to stop." Hope bloomed in my chest. Was he finally seeing reason? Was he going to help me? But before either of us could say another word, a new voice joined our confrontation. "I couldn't agree more," Alejandra said, her voice cold and hard as she descended the stairs. "This madness does need to stop. And it will stop, right now." I turned to see Alejandra, resplendent even in her silk robe, a small pistol held steadily in her hand. The hope that had begun to grow withered and died at the sight of that gleaming metal. "Mama," Diego gasped, his eyes wide with shock. "What are you doing?" Alejandra's laugh was without humor, her eyes never leaving me. "What I should have done from the beginning, my dear. Tying up loose ends." My mind raced, trying to make sense of this new threat. "You're going to kill me?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "And then what? You think you can cover this up too?" "Oh, Amelia," Alejandra sighed, shaking her head as if disappointed in a slow student. "You really don't understand, do you? This isn't just about you. This is about protecting our family, our legacy. Sometimes, sacrifices must be made for the greater good." Diego moved then, placing himself between me and his mother. "No, Mama. This isn't the way. We can't. I won't let you hurt her." For a moment, Alejandra's composure cracked. Surprise, then anger flashed across her face. "You would choose her over your own family? Over everything we've built?" "This isn't family," Diego said, his voice growing stronger. This is insanity. We've lost our way, Mama. We need to stop, to make this right." Alejandra's eyes hardened, her grip tightening on the gun. "Make this right? There is no making this right, Diego. There's only survival. And if you're not with us, then you're against us." The tension in the room was palpable, a living thing that seemed to suck the air from my lungs. I watched, frozen in horror, as mother and son faced off, years of secrets and lies stretching between them like a chasm. "Put the gun down, Mama," Diego said, his voice low and steady. "Please. We can figure this out together. No one has to get hurt." For a moment, I dared to hope. Alejandra's hand trembled slightly, the gun dipping. But then her eyes met mine over Diego's shoulder, and I saw something harden in them. Resolve, or maybe madness. "I'm sorry, my son," she said, her voice eerily calm. "But this ends now." Everything happened so fast after that. Alejandra raised the gun. Diego lunged forward, trying to disarm her. I screamed, the sound torn from my throat as I watched the two people I'd trusted most in the world grapple for control of the weapon. And then, a deafening crack split the air. The smell of gunpowder filled my nostrils. And Diego. Diego crumpled to the floor, a spreading stain of red blossoming on his chest. "No!" The scream came from both Alejandra and me, twin cries of horror and disbelief. For a moment, we were united in our shock, our grief. But as I rushed to Diego's side, Alejandra seemed to snap out of her daze. Her face hardened, the gun once again trained steadily on me. "This is your fault," she hissed, her eyes wild with grief and rage. "If you had just stayed ignorant, if you hadn't pried, none of this would have happened." I ignored her, focusing on Diego. His breathing was labored, his skin pale and clammy. "Diego," I whispered, cradling his head in my lap. "Diego, stay with me. Please." His eyes fluttered open, finding mine. "Amelia," he gasped, his voice weak. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." "Shh," I soothed, tears streaming down my face. "Save your strength. We're going to get you help." But even as I said the words, I knew it might be too late. The wound was bad, the blood loss severe. And Alejandra still stood over us, the gun unwavering in her grip. "It's too late for help," Alejandra said, her voice cold and detached. "It's too late for all of us." I looked up at her, this woman who had orchestrated so much pain and deception. In that moment, I felt no fear, only a deep, burning anger. "Why?" I demanded. "Why did you do all of this? What could possibly be worth destroying so many lives?" For a moment, Alejandra's mask slipped. I saw grief, fear, and something that might have been regret flicker across her face. "You could never understand," she said softly. "The things we've done, the sacrifices we've made, it was all to protect Diego. To give him a chance at a normal life." "Normal?" I laughed bitterly, gesturing to the scene around us. "You call this normal? Drugging me, lying to me, and now, this?" Alejandra's hand tightened on the gun, her knuckles white. "You don't know what he was like before. The things he did, the person he was. I couldn't let him throw his life away. I couldn't lose my son." I looked down at Diego, his eyes glazed with pain but still focused on me. "What is she talking about?" I asked him softly. "What did you do?" Diego's breath hitched, a soft moan escaping his lips. I hurt people, Amelia. Before I met you. I was angry, out of control. There was an accident, people died because of me. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as I tried to process this information. The Diego I knew, the kind, gentle man I'd fallen in love with, had he really been capable of such things? But that was years ago, I said, looking back up at Alejandra. Why continue the deception? Why drug me? Alejandra's laugh was hollow, devoid of any real mirth. Because, my dear, you were getting too close. You started asking questions, noticing things. We couldn't risk you finding out the truth, exposing Diego's past. Everything we'd worked for would have been destroyed. I shook my head, trying to make sense of it all. So you thought drugging me, manipulating my memories, was the answer? Did you ever stop to think that maybe, just maybe, I would have understood? That I might have loved Diego enough to accept his past? For the first time, I saw genuine surprise in Alejandra's eyes. The gun wavered slightly in her grip. You would have stayed. Knowing what he'd done. Before I could answer, Diego's hand found mine, squeezing weakly. Amelia, he gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. I love you. I'm so sorry, for everything. Tears blurred my vision as I looked down at him. Despite everything, despite the lies and the manipulation, I knew in that moment that I still loved him too. I love you too, I whispered back. We're going to get through this. Together. But even as the words left my mouth, I saw something change in Diego's eyes. A clarity, a peace that hadn't been there before. And then, with a soft sigh, his hand went limp in mine. No, I breathed, shaking him gently. No, Diego, please. Don't leave me. Alejandra's anguished cry echoed through the foyer. The gun clattered to the floor as she rushed to her son's side, pushing me roughly away. Diego. Mi hijo, please. Open your eyes. But Diego was beyond hearing us now. As the reality of what had happened sank in, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Slowly, I stood up, my eyes never leaving Alejandra as she wept over her son's body. This is where it ends, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. No more lies. No more manipulation. It's over, Alejandra. She looked up at me, her face a mask of grief and defeat. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice hollow. I took a deep breath, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to run, to put as much distance between myself and this nightmare as possible. But I knew I couldn't leave things like this. I owed it to Diego, to myself, to see this through to the end. I'm going to call the police, I said finally. And then, you're going to tell them everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every crime. It's time for the truth to come out. Alejandra nodded slowly, all fight gone out of her. You're right, she said softly. It's time. I'm tired of running. Tired of hiding. As I reached for my phone, my hand trembling slightly, I couldn't help but reflect on how we'd ended up here. The choices we make, the secrets we keep, the lies we tell ourselves and others, they all have consequences. And sometimes, those consequences are more terrible than we could ever imagine. The next few hours passed in a blur of flashing lights, stern-faced police officers, and endless questions. I watched as Alejandra was led away in handcuffs, her head bowed, looking older and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. Part of me felt pity for her, despite everything. She was a mother who had gone to extreme lengths to protect her child. But in doing so, she had destroyed the very thing she sought to preserve. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting a pale light over the scene of so much tragedy, I found myself standing alone on the front steps of the mansion. The enormity of what had happened, of what I had lost, threatened to overwhelm me. But I knew I had to stay strong, to see this through to the end. An officer approached me, his face kind but serious. Ms. Reyes? We'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. Are you up for that? I nodded, taking a deep breath to steady myself. Yes, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. I'm ready to tell the truth. All of it. As I followed the officer to his car, I cast one last look at the house that had been the stage for so much deception and pain. In the cold light of day, it looked smaller somehow, less imposing. Just a house, after all. Not a fortress, not a prison. Just a place where people had made terrible choices. I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. There would be investigations, trials, endless questions from friends and family. The truth, once unleashed, would change everything. But as I slid into the back seat of the police car, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't expected: hope. Because the truth, no matter how painful, was always better than living a lie. And maybe, just maybe, in facing the truth head-on, I could begin to heal. To move forward. To find a way to honor the memory of the man I had loved, while also honoring myself and the life I deserved to live. As the car pulled away from the curb, I closed my eyes, allowing myself a moment of grief for all that had been lost. But then I straightened my shoulders, opened my eyes, and faced forward. Whatever came next, I would face it with honesty and courage. No more secrets. No more lies. It was time to begin again. The police station was a flurry of activity, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had fallen over Alejandra's mansion in the wake of the tragedy. I sat in a small, windowless room, a cup of lukewarm coffee clutched in my trembling hands. The events of the past few days played on repeat in my mind, a horrific slideshow that I couldn't shut off. Detective Sarah Martinez sat across from me, her dark eyes kind but probing. She had been questioning me for what felt like hours, gently but persistently pulling every detail from my fractured memories. "Ms. Reyes," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me everything again. From the beginning." I took a deep breath, willing my voice to remain steady. "It started on Christmas Eve," I began, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. "We arrived at Alejandra's house, and from the moment we got there, something felt off." I recounted the events of that fateful night, the tension at dinner, the strange taste of the champagne, the inexplicable fainting spell. As I spoke, Detective Martinez took meticulous notes, her pen scratching quietly against her notepad. "And you believe they were drugging you?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. I nodded, my hands tightening around the coffee cup. "I found medical reports in Alejandra's study. They detailed a treatment they'd been administering to me for months. Something called Compound X17. Detective Martinez's eyebrows rose slightly at this. "We'll need to locate those reports," she said. "They could be crucial evidence." As our conversation continued, I found myself revealing things I hadn't even fully processed yet. The snippets of overheard conversations, the growing sense of paranoia, the mounting evidence that the people I trusted most in the world were manipulating me. "Ms. Reyes," Detective Martinez said, leaning forward slightly, "I have to ask. Did you have any idea about Diego's past before this? Any suspicions at all?" I shook my head, feeling a fresh wave of grief wash over me. "No," I whispered. "No, I had no idea. Diego he was kind, gentle. I never would have imagined." My voice trailed off as I remembered Diego's last words, his confession of a violent past. It still seemed impossible to reconcile the man I loved with the person Alejandra had described. Detective Martinez nodded sympathetically. "It's not uncommon for people to hide parts of themselves, even from those closest to them," she said. "But in this case, it seems Diego and his mother went to extreme lengths to keep his past hidden." "But why?" I asked, the question that had been burning inside me finally bursting forth. "Why go to all this trouble? Why not just tell me the truth?" The detective's eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of something, pity, perhaps, or understanding. "That's what we're trying to figure out, Ms. Reyes. And I think it's time we got some answers directly from the source." She stood up, smoothing down her blazer. "I'm going to interview Alejandra now. Would you be willing to observe? Sometimes, hearing the truth directly can provide closure." I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I was ready to face Alejandra again. But then I remembered Diego's face in those final moments, the weight of unspoken truths between us. I needed to know. I deserved to know. "Yes," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'll observe." Detective Martinez led me to an adjoining room, separated from the interrogation room by a large one-way mirror. Through the glass, I could see Alejandra, looking small and defeated in her orange jumpsuit. Her silver hair, usually so perfectly coiffed, hung limply around her face. She looked older, somehow, as if the events of the past few days had aged her decades. As Detective Martinez entered the interrogation room, Alejandra looked up. For a moment, her eyes seemed to lock with mine through the mirror, as if she could sense my presence. I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself. "Mrs. Vega," Detective Martinez began, her tone professional but not unkind. "I'm going to ask you some questions about your son, Diego, and the events leading up to his death. Do you understand?" Alejandra nodded, her movements slow and defeated. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I understand." "Let's start at the beginning," the detective said, opening a file in front of her. "Can you tell me about Diego's past? The incidents that you and he were so desperate to keep hidden." Alejandra was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow, devoid of the strength and authority I'd always associated with her. "It started when Diego was in college," she began. "He was troubled. Angry. He fell in with a bad crowd, started drinking too much, getting into fights." I listened, my heart pounding, as Alejandra painted a picture of a Diego I'd never known. A young man struggling with anger issues, spiraling out of control. It was so at odds with the gentle, composed man I'd fallen in love with that I found myself shaking my head in disbelief. "There was an incident," Alejandra continued, her voice catching. "A bar fight that got out of hand. Diego, he pushed a man. The man fell, hit his head. He died instantly." I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. Diego had killed someone. It seemed impossible, unthinkable. And yet, as I remembered the guilt in his eyes in those final moments, a horrible certainty began to settle over me. "What happened then?" Detective Martinez asked, her voice steady. Alejandra's laugh was bitter, mirthless. "What do you think happened?" "I did what any mother would do. I protected my son." As Alejandra detailed the cover-up that followed, the bribes, the threats, the carefully constructed alibis, I felt my world tilting on its axis. The life I thought I'd been living, the love I thought I'd found, it had all been built on a foundation of lies and violence. But why continue the deception for so long? Detective Martinez pressed. "Why drug Amelia?" At the mention of my name, Alejandra's eyes flicked towards the mirror again. "Diego, he changed after that night. He was consumed by guilt, by fear of discovery. We got him help, therapy, medication. He became the man you knew, Amelia," she said, addressing me directly now, though she couldn't see me. "The kind, gentle Diego. That was real. But the past, it was always there, lurking beneath the surface." She took a shuddering breath before continuing. "When Diego met Amelia, it was like he'd been given a second chance at life. He was happy, truly happy. But as their relationship grew serious, he became paranoid. Convinced that if Amelia knew the truth, she'd leave him. So you decided to drug her instead." Detective Martinez's voice held a note of disbelief. Alejandra's shoulders slumped. "It wasn't like that, not at first. It started small, a mild sedative to help with Amelia's anxiety when she started asking questions about Diego's past. But then, it escalated. We told ourselves it was for her own good, for Diego's protection. But really, we were just scared. Scared of the truth coming out, scared of losing everything we'd built." As I listened to Alejandra's confession, I felt a maelstrom of emotions swirling inside me. Anger at the betrayal, grief for the man I'd loved and lost, and a deep, aching sadness for the tragedy that had unfolded around us all. "Mrs. Vega," Detective Martinez said, her voice taking on a harder edge, you do understand the severity of what you're confessing to? Involuntary manslaughter, obstruction of justice, drugging an innocent woman. Alejandra nodded, a single tear trailing down her cheek. I understand. And I'm prepared to face the consequences. I've been running from the truth for so long. I'm tired. So tired. As the interview concluded and Alejandra was led away, I remained rooted to the spot, my mind reeling from the revelations. Detective Martinez joined me in the observation room, her face etched with concern. Ms. Reyes, she said gently, I know this must be overwhelming. We have counselors on staff if you'd like to speak with someone. I shook my head, still trying to process everything I'd heard. I need some time. To think. She nodded understandingly. Of course. But there's one more thing you should know. She hesitated for a moment before continuing. We found something in Diego's personal effects. A letter, addressed to you. It was never sent. My heart skipped a beat. A letter? Can I see it? Detective Martinez produced an evidence bag containing a slightly crumpled envelope. My name was written on the front in Diego's familiar handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened the seal and began to read, My dearest Amelia, if you're reading this, it means the truth has finally come out. I'm so sorry. Sorry for the lies, for the deception, for not being strong enough to tell you the truth from the beginning. I want you to know that my love for you was real. It was the most real thing in my life. You saw in me the man I always wanted to be, the man I was trying so hard to become. But the weight of my past, the guilt of what I'd done, it was always there, threatening to destroy everything. I know now that I should have trusted you with the truth. I should have believed in the strength of our love. Instead, I let fear guide me. I let my mother convince me that keeping you in the dark was the only way to protect what we had. I see now how wrong we were. How much damage we've done in the name of protection. Amelia, I don't expect your forgiveness. What we did to you is unforgivable. But I hope that someday, you can find peace. That you can look back on our time together and remember not just the lies, but the love that was at the core of it all. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. You deserved the truth, and a love unburdened by the weight of past mistakes. I'm sorry I couldn't be that for you. Please, live your life fully. Be happy. And know that, despite everything, you were loved. Truly and deeply. Forever yours, Diego. As I finished reading, I realized I was crying, silent tears streaming down my face. The letter was everything I'd needed to hear and everything I'd been afraid of. It was closure and heartbreak all at once. Detective Martinez gave me a moment to compose myself before speaking. Ms. Reyes, I know this is a lot to process. Take all the time you need. We'll have more questions in the coming days, but for now, you're free to go. Is there someone who can come pick you up? I nodded, thinking of my best friend, Sophia, who had been calling non-stop since the news broke. Yes, I can call someone. As I left the police station, stepping out into the harsh light of day, I felt as if I was emerging from a long, dark tunnel. The world around me seemed too bright, too loud, too normal for the turmoil I felt inside. I found a quiet bench nearby and sat down, Diego's letter clutched tightly in my hand. As I reread his words, I felt a complex mix of emotions washing over me. Anger at the betrayal, grief for the man I'd loved and lost, and a deep, aching sadness for the tragedy that had unfolded around us all. But beneath it all, there was something else. A tiny flicker of understanding, of compassion. Diego had been trapped by his past, consumed by guilt and fear. In trying to protect me, to protect the life we'd built together, he'd made terrible choices. But his love, at least, had been real. As I sat there, letting the full weight of everything settle over me, I realized that this was just the beginning. There would be more questions, more revelations, more pain to work through. The road ahead would be long and difficult. But I also knew that I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. I had survived betrayal, manipulation, and loss. I had faced the truth, no matter how painful. And I would continue to do so, one day at a time. I pulled out my phone and dialed Sophia's number. As it rang, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. There was so much to explain, so much to process. But for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was out. The lies had been exposed. And while the path forward was uncertain, I knew that it would be my own. No more manipulation, no more half-truths. Just me, facing the future with open eyes and an open heart. As Sophia's worried voice came through the phone, I felt a small smile tug at my lips. "Hey, Soph," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "Can you come pick me up? I have a lot to tell you." The story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But whatever came next, I would face it head-on. Because that's who I was, a survivor, a truth seeker. And nothing, not even the ghosts of Diego's past or the weight of Alejandra's manipulations, could change that. As I waited for Sophia, I watched the world go by. People hurrying to and fro, living their lives, unaware of the seismic shifts that had occurred in mine. I envied them their normalcy, their uncomplicated existence. But I also felt a strange sense of gratitude. I had been given a chance to start anew, to rebuild my life on a foundation of truth rather than lies. I thought about Diego, about the man I had loved and the troubled soul he had hidden from me. I thought about Alejandra, her misguided attempts to protect her son leading to such devastating consequences. And I thought about myself, the woman I had been, naive and trusting, and the woman I was becoming, stronger and wiser for all I had endured. The future stretched out before me, uncertain but full of possibility. There would be hard days ahead, days when the weight of all that had happened would threaten to overwhelm me. But there would also be days of healing, of growth, of rediscovering who I was outside of the web of lies I'd been living in. As Sophia's car pulled up and I saw her worried face through the window, I took a deep breath. It was time to start telling my story, time to begin the long process of healing. And as I stood up, tucking Diego's letter into my pocket, I felt a surge of determination. Whatever came next, I would face it with honesty and courage. No more secrets. No more lies. It was time to embrace the truth, in all its painful, beautiful complexity. It was time to begin again.